Welcome to Solosaurus, a podcast about one-player board and card games. My name is Brandon Waite.
And my name is Carter Mackey.
And this is episode 53, where we are talking about a game that looks great under a black light, Degenerates. If you've not seen the cover for this game, it looks absolutely wild. And what's inside is actually crazier somehow.
Yeah, the art is very much heavy metal, like crazy old school dungeon type art. And it makes my eyes want to bleed sometimes.
Yes, it does, but in the best possible way. Before we get to that review, we're going to get started the same way we always do by talking about the news. And the news comes to us, as it always does, from tablefor1.me, which is put together by the wonderful Frederick Schultz, who does a great job of aggregating solo games news and reviews. So if you haven't checked that out, go and check that out. That's tablefor1.me. And our first bit of news for this week is that there is somehow a new expansion being released for Fallout the board game called the Atomic Bonds Cooperative Upgrade Pack.
So is this something that people have been clamoring for?
I have no idea. I don't feel like I see anybody playing Fallout the board game anymore. And to clarify, this is not Fallout the miniatures game that we reviewed. This is the game from Fantasy Flight that came out in 2017. I actually owned this at one point, and it was not good.
Yeah, I don't remember hearing much about it after it came out.
Yeah, it really did. It came out to a lot of excitement. The miniatures for Fallout, characters looked really cool. But man, it was incredibly luck dependent, and it just didn't feel like Fallout very much.
Mm-hmm.
Very fiddly. But there are a handful of people out there who still really like it. And what's interesting about this pack is it takes every competitive scenario from the base game and from the new California expansion and makes them cooperative, which is pretty cool because that effectively doubles the number of scenarios that you could play in a solo game.
Right.
And I think that's a great idea. If you're going to release a pack for a game that's been out for a couple of years, it needs to be small, but it increases the replayability so that people who really love it can just keep getting it to the table, I guess.
Right.
So, very neat idea. In addition to making everything cooperative, it also adds modification, mutation, and workshop cards, which allow you to customize your character more, which is, that's what Fallout's about.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you're interested in that, it is available for pre-order now through the Fantasy Flight website. It is coming out Q2 2020. So, that is Fallout Atomic Bonds Cooperative Upgrade Pack. Our second bit of news for this week is that Command Games is kickstarting Marvel United. And Marvel United is a chibi family weight Marvel game, which appeals to me not at all.
Yeah, I'm not looking forward to this one. I don't know. It's fine. It's whatever. I just don't care.
I don't really care either. I love the Marvel IP so much. You don't care about it that much.
It's fine.
Yeah. When I heard that they were making a Marvel game, I got briefly very excited. And then not excited at all. It seems to be kind of a weird card game for families. You know what? I don't see the appeal here, but a lot of people obviously do. It's made $1.5 million on Kickstarter so far. The miniatures, if you do like chibi style, are definitely well sculpted. They have some real deep cut characters like Moon Knight, who's one of my favorites. If you like that art style and you like Marvel, you'll like this. It now also has a solo mode that was unlocked as a stretch goal. That's Shield mode. And it sounds like Shield mode is code for play multiple characters, and that's how you play solo. I didn't read that much into it, confession, but that's what it appears to be. But if you are interested in that and want to command multiple heroes, that is available to you. So you can check out Marvel United from Command Games, which is on Kickstarter right now. And if it's not any longer when this episode comes out, you'll still be able to back it as a late backer in a couple of weeks. And our final bit of news for this week is that Garphill Games has announced Raiders of Scythia, which is interesting because they announced in the same day, I think, Viscounts of the West Kingdom, which is their third in the Kingdom trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
And they also announced the Tome Saga expansion, which I think is the one that lets you play all of the games in the trilogy. Somehow they fit together.
Right.
Which is a really neat idea. They announced both those things in the same day and then announced this. And this is apparently the spiritual successor to Raiders of the North Sea. And a lot of people really love that game.
So by spiritual successor, are they just going for basically it's the same game? I don't know, and just with a different theme?
It doesn't look like the same game. Raiders of the North Sea was first and foremost a worker placement game.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like this might have some of that. but the design of the player boards and everything doesn't seem to be very similar at all to Raiders. I think what they mean is it is a game about pillaging and questing, and there was a lot of that in Raiders, but maybe that this was just focusing on one specific clan. I know nothing about the Scythians.
Okay.
So I'm not 100% sure how this connects to Raiders. It also has a different artist than Raiders. This is the artist who worked on Circadian's First Light, which for me feels like very kind of stiff. I don't love that artist. But if you liked Raiders of the North Sea and you like pillaging and you like questing, and of course you do, it's probably worth at least taking a look at this. Garfield Games makes really solid stuff, and this is going to have a solo mode out of the box. Another thing that's interesting about this game is that this is their first straight-to-retail game. So check that out. That's Raiders of Scythia, and you can learn a little bit more about that on their website or BGG. And that's all the news we have for this episode, so we are going to get into the review, but before we do, just want to say a quick word about our sponsor, which is Stone Valley Games. Stone Valley Games is a small company that carries a lot of games that are focused on solo play. They're not a solo games retailer, I wouldn't call them that, but they do have a lot of games that are a good fit for that. They have a lot of RPG supplies, and most importantly, they have great customer service. I have ordered a couple of things from them now, and everything I've gotten has been extremely well packed. Like, I don't think even DHL could mess up this package. Everything came bubble wrapped and sealed well, and the prices on it are really good. So I found a number of times that when I'm looking for something that's sold out other places, like the Marvel Champions expansions, I can find them on their site. Plus, when you buy something, if you review it, you get discounts on future games and loyalty points too. So, I mean, they've got a really great thing going, and they are so friendly and easy to work with. If you haven't checked out Stone Valley, do yourself a favor and try it. They're a really great company, and they also do ship for free to people who are in the U.S. military serving overseas. So if you have somebody in your family who's overseas right now and you want to get them a gift, this is a really good way to do that. Check them out at stonevalleygames.com. All right, we're going to get now into the review, which is for Dungeon Degenerates Hand of Doom. This is a game that comes to us from designers Sean Aberg and Eric Radley, and publisher Goblinko Games. It came out in 2017 and plays 1 to 4 players. In Dungeon Degenerates, players take on the role of escaped criminals adventuring in the lands of the Verstreich, a land on the brink of collapse because of a powerful necromancer who is tearing apart the very fabric of reality with his vile magic. So like most cooperative sandbox games, you're going to be fighting monsters and gaining loot in an attempt to make yourself stronger as you try to forge your own path in this weird world. It's up to you whether that plan will save the world, hasten its doom, or something in between. So we're going to start the review by talking about the components like we always do. And Carter?
Can we just talk about the art? I mean, just look it up if you haven't seen it before. I mean, it's just a very iconic style of art. There's nothing else like it, and it is everywhere. It's covering the board, on every card, it's on your character sheet, and it is very stark colors, very bold lines, just really crazy scenes that you will love or hate or make your eyes bleed because of love or hate. I don't know.
Yeah, it's definitely like stoner art, blacklight poster kind of art. It's really bizarre and grotesque. And by grotesque, I don't mean like particularly gory or anything, but all the monsters are just really vile looking. They definitely play up odors and unseemliness of everything about these creatures that you encounter, and really about you, the adventurers.
Yeah.
You're not great looking either.
Yeah, there's nothing that's like pretty or good looking, I would say.
No. The color palette for this game is wild. On the outside of the box alone, there's just this hot pink with yellow lettering. Your characters are surrounded by these dark navy and hot pink creatures, and they are bright orange and yellow in the middle of it. So there's none of this like muted earth tone color palette that you see in a lot of dungeon crawl games. This is all crazy all the time. It has this nice big fold out board that's glossy and is covered in this artwork. And I think the board looks kind of stunning if you like this art. And this is carried through every component in the game. So first and foremost, if you think you're interested in buying this game, for sure look at some of the art. Some of the humor is also like pretty off color and gross. Like there's definitely like some sexual innuendo and stuff like that. And so it's not going to be for everybody is what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
So just make sure you know what you're getting yourself into. But it super appeals to me. I love the artwork in this game, mostly because it's so different from everything else out there.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's an art that most people probably have seen at some point, but I can't think of any other like board game that even attempts anything close to this. And that's the thing, if you like this style, I mean, it is dripping with it. It's just like constantly reinforcing the feel of the game. I know this isn't really just about components, but I mean, it's like everything with the components and the way the components are designed visually reinforces just that kind of theme and feel of this game, that this is a degenerate, corrupt world that is falling apart.
Yeah, and in that sense, the components really do a good job, I think, of serving this game well. In another sense, though, the components are pretty bad. The card quality is not great, and it has these black borders that are going to get nicked up and beat up pretty quickly, I think. So if you're not a card sleever, and I am not and never will be, your cards will get bent up. The chits and tokens for this game, there are approximately 1 gajillion of them.
God, there's so many of them.
There's no good way to store this game that I have found, apart from I made my own foam core insert for it, which you can see on our Facebook page or Instagram if you want to.
I'm still kind of amazed that you actually did that, because I feel like you hate stuff like that.
I do generally hate stuff like that, but I could not imagine myself playing this game without it. There are just too many different components. I tried to put it in Plano boxes. I tried everything, and it wasn't working. So you're going to have to figure out something storage-wise. Also, I mean, they're just not printed super well. Like, a lot of them are off-center. They punch out terribly when you're trying to punch them out of the boards. I ripped several of my tokens in the process of trying to get them out. Production-wise, it's clear that this is like a 2-person operation, not a professional game publisher or anything like that. And they've done the best they could, but it's several notches below a standard game production. Even the top of my box is very weirdly warped and kind of caved in. And so I can't push it down all the way on top of the box. So it's just really, it's kind of strange production-wise. The very worst thing about this, though, is to keep track of your stats for your characters. You have these flimsy little mats for your player characters that contain pretty crucial information about, like, suggested upgrades for your character, for instance, on the back. But on top of the sheet, you have to put these tiny little chits to keep track of your stats.
They're so small.
They're the worst. They're the worst game component I've ever worked with. And if you want to be able to see like what upgrade path they recommend, you really need to either look at all of your stats and remember where these tokens are, which you're not going to do, or you need to pick it up very carefully and hold it above your head and kind of read it from the bottom, which is what I did.
How well did that work out?
Not great. And then when I dropped it on the floor, I couldn't find the chits. So, yeah, production-wise, there's a lot to be desired, I would say. But the artwork, for me, is stunning. For a lot of people, it will be revolting. So it's just, the whole experience is not very tight. And I would say that extends into the rule book as well.
So what about it is not tight to you, though? I'd be interested to know.
So to me, the rule book is quite long.
It's very long, yes.
The gameplay is not that complicated.
No.
Like, turn to turn, you really don't have many decisions to make. What doesn't feel tight to me is it feels like this game needed a really good developer to come in and tell these designers, you really don't need rules for what kind of stance you're adventuring in. When you're moving across the map, you have the ability to move in bold stance or to be cautious. Maybe better players of this game will tell me why this matters, but I never felt like I was so endangered that I needed to be cautious. I just was always bold. So there's a whole section of rules on bold or cautious that didn't need to be there, really. It's not an interesting decision, and it's not a decision that I found myself making very often.
Right.
There's a whole section in there about how these portals can pop up on the board, and you may need to go through the portal and go to this kind of in-between interdimensional space called the maze. And there's a whole huge section of rules on the maze. Never once in all of my plays of this game have I had an opportunity to go to the maze.
Really?
Yeah, I can see where it could happen.
Right, sure.
But it didn't happen to me. So stuff like that, that's what I mean by not tight. There's so much of the rules are dedicated to things that are either not interesting for the player or that don't come up that often.
Yeah. That makes sense. I guess what I was thinking about, what came to mind when I was reading through it, was this seems really simple and straightforward, and I was kind of waiting for complicated rules, but they never came. It was just like exceptions, potential things that could happen. I mean, it almost kind of reminded me of like a role-playing system in a sense of trying to like accommodate for all these exceptions, and it's like wasn't really necessary. And like at some point I was like, all right, I'm just not going to read this because there's no way I'm going to remember what to do anyway, and I'm going to have to look it back up. Yeah. I'll just know that there are rules that will guide me through this process if I need it.
And that's the right way to approach it, I think. I mean, the rulebook is just filled with edge cases.
Right.
The good thing about that is they're trying to replicate a tabletop RPG experience. And you really can't do that unless you have a lot of space to play in. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes an RPG what it is. But that just overcomplicates the rulebook needlessly.
Right. I will say, I mean, one thing that definitely increased the length of the rulebook that I wouldn't say is bad is they had example explanations of every single thing. And if there was a rule that I was like, what are they talking about? How would this even work? Or what does this mean? And then they would explain it, and they would explain the exceptions that they're giving rules for and everything. So I never at any point felt like I didn't understand or was like confused by it. It was just very methodically given out and then explained with an example.
Yeah, that is true. It was very clear. By the time I finished the rule book, which I was intimidated by to start, I felt like I had a really good grasp on how to play the game, with the exception of those places like the void gates and the maze and all that, where I'm like, I don't even know what this would look like.
Right.
But yeah, otherwise the examples are very clear, and there's a couple of really great player aids.
Yeah, which I would say they're not just great, they're essential.
Yes, for sure. There are two, I think, a big 8.5 by 11 double-sided player aids, one of which is dedicated almost entirely to combat.
Yeah.
And it lays it out really simply and beautifully. I thought that was outstanding. I mean, it does take up a lot of space on your table to have two 8.5 by 11 player aids next to you. Plus, I also had both of the rule books, like the rule book and the campaign book. But still, it worked out well for me. I mean, apart from taking up space, I thought it was helpful.
One thing I'll say about the rulebook also in regards to that is I did somewhat appreciate the fact that they were like, this game can take up a lot of space. You don't need all of these things out. You can put these things back in the box if you don't need them.
Yeah, that's a really good idea.
Yeah, which is, I mean, it's not great when a game takes up tons of like table space, especially if it's limited for you. But I like that they just kind of, at least the self-awareness of being like, this takes up a lot of space. You don't need to have everything out of the table at once.
Yeah. Otherwise, generally speaking, both the rules and the play of this game to me felt like they were designed by people who wanted to design a board game, but haven't played a lot of hobby board games.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's not a bad thing necessarily, because in some ways that breeds the kind of creativity that really sets this apart. There's nothing like this, but that makes a lot of things in the game feel off-center.
Yeah.
But saying that, I would still have to acknowledge, like, when it comes to playing the game, there are a lot of things here that are going to feel familiar, I think. At its heart, this is a campaign-based adventure game. In this box, you're going to get a rule book, you're going to get a mission book, and the mission book contains 20 different missions that you can play. You can play them standalone, but they're obviously designed to be played as a campaign. That's the primary thing. When you play through one of these missions, you're going to be moving across the overworld, exploring paths, fighting monsters, and trying to fulfill some kind of goal, right? So in that way, all of it will feel pretty familiar to you. But the way they handle each of those things in the box is just a little bit different than probably anything else you played. So for instance, when I say this is a campaign-based game, you shouldn't get this idea in your head that you will need to dedicate like 200 hours of gameplay, which seems to be the thing that everybody touts nowadays. That's not what this is. This is a campaign can be a string of anywhere from 3 to 5 missions, but each of the missions takes maybe 30 to 40 minutes to play through.
I mean, I would say once you get familiar with it, they get up to that speed. Starting off, I feel like I was still hesitantly going through things, making sure I was doing things right.
Oh, that's true. And I've played a lot of the missions in this game, so I have gotten a little quicker at it. But what that means is that you aren't playing a campaign over the course of a couple of months or a year or whatever. You're playing it in an evening or two.
Right, which is really nice.
Yeah, it is nice. It's kind of the best of both worlds of campaign-based games and scenario-based. You know, and I'm trending more towards scenario-based games nowadays because, I mean, I just don't have the stick-to-itiveness, I guess, to finish a campaign game. But I like the sense of growth that you get in a campaign. This is nice. You get to do both of those things. That's pretty cool. Short chapters, and there are 20 missions in the box, but this campaign structure has some branching paths, to put it mildly.
Yeah, and it's one of the coolest things about the campaign, because it's not little like binary choices where it'd be like, okay, well, I'll do this or that. And it's like, I side with this faction or that faction or this person or that, or just, I don't know. Or you just like do a thing and you're like, well, I check a box and it'll obviously have an effect later, but I don't really know or understand why. This is like, oh no, I'm going to do radically different things. And who knows what the repercussions are going to be.
That's the thing to me that is absolutely most compelling about this, is most of the time when I play a fantasy style adventure game, what I want it to be is a really cool and compelling world that I can go out and explore and do what I want to in. And what it usually turns out to be is a tactical skirmish combat game with little bits of flavor text in between.
Oh, do you have a game in mind when you say all those things?
I do. I'm thinking of Gloomhaven in particular, but really any dungeon crawl is that way.
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
And most of the time, they're not heavy on story. They're heavy on skirmish combat. So I've only recently realized this, so I'm just slow to catch on, I guess, but I think I like overworld adventure games more than dungeon crawls, but there aren't that many of those by comparison. And even the ones that exist usually aren't heavy on story, or if they are heavy on story, it's pretty on rails, and it's not like there are a lot of compelling choices. So, for instance, Lord of the Rings Journeys in Middle-earth. I would consider that kind of an overworld adventure game for the most part. But the story is not very strong, and there is some divergence in the mission structure, but it doesn't feel like you made an impact on the world. This game sets you loose. Like the very first mission of this game is you're in prison, and a guard approaches you and offers to let you out if you will go and dig up some item for him out in the graveyard or whatever, not far from the castle where you're being held, and delivering it to his brother. Well, you can choose to refuse his offer and fight your way out. You can get out and tell him you'll go dig this thing up and do it. Or you can choose just to not do it and go look for work. Or you can go and dig it up and, you'll get to interact with it, and that thing that you dig up will send you another 3 or 4 other places. So basically, that very first mission has like 5 or 6 different ways that you can resolve it. That is so different than a lot of mission structures that you find in this game.
Yeah, there's something... And I think what's really good about it, you get a clear sense when you're like, well, what am I going to do? Because this is all going to be different. It's not... I feel like a lot of times these choices can feel a little arbitrary. Or it's like, oh, well, I'll help the witch or not help the witch. Or, and it's just kind of like, okay, I'll just choose one and we'll see what happens. Where it's like, oh no, I'm just going to do something completely different. I have no idea what's ahead of me. And like, that's exciting and it's cool.
Yeah, like I think about playing Breath of the Wild for the first time, right? Where you just go out into this world and there's just so much stuff. Like there's just so much stuff you could encounter and explore. And what makes that cool and exciting, I mean, apart from the fact that it's a Zelda game and that means it's going to be awesome, what makes it exciting is you don't know what's out there. It could be anything. The possibilities are endless. You could just do whatever you want to do. And that's so hard to capture in a board game that when I read this for the first time and it was like, you could do this or do this or do this or do this. And depending on what you do, it'll send you to an entirely different mission at the end of it. That is so cool. It made me feel like I was really exploring this world. And what's nice about this game is they created a world that I want to explore.
Yeah. A very grim but intriguing world.
Yeah, it's not a pleasant place to be,
no.
But it's just so bizarro.
Mm-hmm.
Like even the way the map is designed, the differences in the regions on the map. Like I want to know what's in this swampland with a tree that has a crazy pumpkin face, I want to know what's there, and I want to see what kind of loot is there and what kind of stories I can encounter. And it gives you space to do that, which is great. Now, mechanically, the way that exploration works is a little rough around the edges, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
This is a game about moving around a cool map and drawing random monsters and events along the way to see what happens to you.
Right.
Is that kind of a fair summary?
Yeah, where the story choices are, I think, very interesting in kind of what you're pursuing. It is just very much, okay, another random encounter.
The flavor text is what's interesting, but basically, the mission structure is always go to this place next.
Right.
And fight a monster there, or just go there and interact with that space.
Right.
So it's not like you're going to get wildly different missions from game to game, right? In the way that you do with Journeys in Middle-earth, for instance.
Right.
All the missions in that game feel very different. They all feel the same, but story-wise, they're way more interesting. So, like movement, for instance, really bizarre. You can either move from a town onto an adjacent road or path, or from that road or path to an adjacent town, or the next path or whatever. But it's a very weird pace. Like you're only moving, it feels like you should be able to move from one town to the next town and skip the road in between. But that's not how this works. You have to spend a whole turn just to get onto the road, and then another whole turn to get from the road onto the next town or whatever. That feels so antiquated and weird to me.
It was one of those things I remember reading, and I was like, huh, okay. So roads are spaces. And I don't know. I think it's also the fact that there are some spaces that are adjacent. And like, I guess you can essentially visually tell that they're somewhat adjacent, but not really at the same time. It's weird just the way you move around and what actually are considered spaces. What are roads? What are paths? Because paths you have to explore first before you can take them. You can force march to go like over roads quickly.
Yeah, the rules that surround movement are all strange. There's definitely a form over function problem here with the artwork when it comes to movement, because like you said, some things are adjacent that I'm like, if I did not see this spelled out in the rulebook, I never would have guessed that these were adjacent. Also, if you're moving from one place to another along a road, that's different than if you're moving along a path. You know, if you're moving along a path, you have to move from the city or town onto the path, and then from the path onto the next thing. If you are moving along a road, you can choose to like push yourself and move from one place to the next. And then they build these weird rules in for exploring these paths so that if you come back here on a future turn, you can travel it the same way that you would a road. Like thematically, that makes sense, but mechanically, it's just really weird and stilted.
It's just unnecessary, I feel like, what it comes down to.
Yeah.
It's not really fun, and, well, yeah, like, I guess it kind of makes sense in a thematic way. It doesn't really add to anything thematically, and because there's nothing, like, special or unique about doing the path. Or, like, you know, taking a path space or whatever.
No, it's not an interesting decision at all.
Mm-mm.
And the way that a turn structure is going to work is you're going to move in either bold or cautious stance, which means that basically if you're in bold stance, you have a greater chance of encountering enemies. And after you've finished moving, you can like interact if you're on a space that can let you interact with it, like a town or something like that. You can buy cards and do all the normal sort of things that you can do in an adventure game. And then you're going to draw an event card. And it's basically what's going to happen there is one part of the map is going to get worse. Like the danger level is going to go up, or of wilderness spaces. Or if it's a town space, the stability of that town is going to degrade. And then you're going to look at the little number on the card there that you've drawn. And if it's lower than the danger level of the space where you are, then you're going to encounter a monster. And fighting in this game is not interesting at all. The only thing that makes it interesting is the enemy design.
Right.
The enemies are crazy, and they match the region that they're in. Each region has its own deck, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
You know, and the creature design is wild and very interesting to look at. But mechanically, man, there's almost nothing going on here.
Right. And we should say it's not only like you have monsters and then you have like law. So you also have.
Oh, right. The law that's chasing you down because you've escaped.
Right. And just, yeah. And also just that sense of corrupt officials.
Yeah, I like that. They all look kind of Gestapo-like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Mixed with dominatrix.
Right.
I mean, yeah, it's really weird.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's like you're kind of, I guess, just to add on to the whole idea of like creature design and stuff like that. And like, you know, and it just builds and adds into that theme. But just like actually performing the combat, not super interesting or compelling.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, what makes combat compelling is that you can be traveling down a path and you can sometimes get an encounter card where you have to resolve, like, you come across a cult that's having a parade through the woods. Do you try to join them or do you try to hide until they pass? And like that sort of thing is fun and flavorful. But it always comes down to you either take a negative condition or you roll a die to resolve that. So it's not like you're making any kind of interesting mechanical decision. And then after you've had that encounter, maybe then you encounter these monsters. And there's kind of an emergent story that happens, right? Like we escaped from jail. We dug up this thing that the guard told us to. And then as we're leaving town, we're walking through the woods when we're stopped by basically an SS officer in a dominatrix outfit and a sex dwarf, which is, I mean, just as weird as it gets.
Yeah, it really is. It's bizarre.
And that sort of thing isn't without value, right? Because there's story that comes out of that and memorable game experience that comes out of that. But combat is just, do you want to be more aggressive and try to get more hits, do more damage, or do you want to try to be more defensive and make sure you don't get hit? Okay, after you've decided that, roll some dice, and if you rolled well enough, then you hit and do good, and if not, then you do bad. It's roll to resolve. That's all it is. Yeah, each of the enemies has different kind of special abilities and bad things they can do to you, and that might make you think for a second about how to make your decisions, but there's really not interesting decision space here. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Again, for some people who don't want to think through things mechanically, they just want to experience a world and a story, then that's what this is here for. But if you like to have agency, this is not going to be your cup of tea, this entire combat system. Other than those two things, that's basically what you're going to be doing every turn. Move, draw an event card, probably fight something. Move, draw an event card, probably fight something, until you get to the place where your quest tells you need to go, and then you're done. It's very kind of repetitive in that way. On occasion, you will want to explore paths to make them easier to travel in the future, but you may never travel that way again. You can invest in towns to improve them a little bit. You're going to want to try to seek out places on the board that are particularly bad, because if you keep drawing cards for spaces that are already at their max danger level, the hand of doom will descend upon the land, and that will hasten the end of the game. But because it takes so long to travel all over the board, your ability to go to those places and decrease the danger level by fighting monsters there is limited. So even though that's not a bad idea, it's just kind of limited by the way the other mechanics work. And that's pretty much how the entire game works. Move, fight, move. What makes this interesting is the replayability for this game is pretty high. And it's high because, I mean, there are a lot of different characters in the main game, and they're bizarre.
Yes.
They're not your typical rogue or ranger or whatever. You can be a witch smeller. You can be a corpse burner. You could be a blood sport brawler. I mean, they're really wild. So there's some replay value that comes through just picking different characters to go through this thing with. But what really makes it interesting is every decision you make campaign-wise and story-wise closes off paths to you that you will not see in this game. So there's a lot of incentive to go back and play another campaign and just try a different path and see what happens.
Right, yeah. So whenever because you've played through multiple times, do you always start back from the beginning, or do you ever pick back up at like a kind of decision point?
So when I played through this, because I was doing it for review prep or with review prep in mind, I did sometimes go back to one of those crucial decision points and then take the branching path. But that's really not the way the game's designed to be played. I mean, balance-wise, there are some things you need to undo from your previous mission if you're going to do that.
Right.
I think if you go back and play this from the beginning each time, because that first mission has so many different ways out, and because there's so much variability in the cards, I mean, you're not going to see even half the cards in one of these decks in one campaign, which is pretty extreme. I think it's worth playing back from the beginning because you'll have a different experience. You'll encounter different monsters. You get the full kind of level up and growth experience. Just to play through more of the missions quickly, I did play it the other way. And I'll say some of the missions are more interesting than others. Right. Some are just like go and kill a couple of enemies in these areas. Very kind of simple. Others, though, are, I don't want to give away story spoilers, but I'll just say you can end up basically saving the world, or you can make things go very, very, very badly for this place that's already not in great shape. And that's still considered a win condition.
Yeah, right.
And that to me is very cool. And so I've played this game, I guess I've played 17 of the 20 missions that are in the booklet. I mean, that's a lot of times playing this game. And I'm still interested in going back and trying to figure out the path that gets me to the other 3 that I haven't gotten to yet.
Right.
I would consider that high replayability.
Yeah, absolutely.
And beyond just what's in the box, too, it's important to know that if you go onto the Gumblingo website, which is the only place where you can buy this game, there is a small box expansion that basically gives you encounters in cities called the Mean Streets expansion. You can get more characters. I think there's another 16.
That's wild.
Yeah, it's crazy. And they're not really... The characters aren't that different in terms of their abilities, but they start out with different equipment and things, so they do feel pretty different.
Yeah, I would say just kind of the abilities that you get from the items.
Yeah, and that makes it worth it, I think. And then they also publish these magazines that basically, they have a whole series of magazines that give you more lore and background on the world and also include some missions inside. So if you want to expand this, there's more content out there. But it's also worth knowing that it's pretty expensive. The MSRP for this is $80, and this is not an $80 game. I mean, they have to charge that much, I'm sure, because they're doing small print runs.
Right.
But if you pay $80 for this, you've overpaid for what's in the box, at least in terms of the physical components. The experiences that are in here, though, are wild.
They're wild, and I would say it's a pretty unique experience compared to what's out there.
Yeah, I think so. And so you have to decide whether $80 is worth it to you. I'll say that I picked mine up on Black Friday and I paid half that much. So $40 for this game felt very reasonable to me. Take that for what it's worth, but that's just one thing I'm going to throw out there. Otherwise, I think we've talked about everything that this game has to offer, right?
Yeah.
So let's get now into the good, the bad, and the ugly for this game. And for me, the first thing I'm going to say about the game in the good category is artwork and atmosphere.
Yeah, just the art, theme, atmosphere, all of that. For better or worse, like if you hate it, doesn't matter. Like it's done very well, and it is just completely cohesive throughout the entire experience.
Yeah, it definitely is. I've seen a lot of people online who are like, how can you look at this game? It makes me want to claw my eyes out. Okay, so I understand that not everybody's where I am, but I think it's a really cool art style. But even more than that, the art style fits the world so perfectly and really brings it to life in a way that makes this game feel to me more like a tabletop RPG in a box than any other game I've played. It's a world I want to explore. It's really intriguing and different than anything else that's out there. And the campaign story is just totally different than anything else I've experienced.
Yeah, it's pretty bonkers.
And what makes it really great to me is the commitment to consequences. If you make a choice to do a bad thing, man, it's not going to go a little bad. It's going to go really bad in a way that affects the entire world.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. You want to feel like you've had an impact on this thing that you spent a couple of hours interacting with. So that is, for me, the best thing about the game. Campaign, atmosphere, and characters. Like the choice of making non-traditional character classes is a great one, and one that I wish more games would do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like sometimes games will do that, and it's just, I don't know, they still feel a little hollow or not really meaningful, but this kind of once again reinforces the atmosphere and theme of this weird, bizarre world.
Yeah, I completely agree. So that's what's good here in this game for me. As for what's bad, there are a number of things. I think, first of all, there's a lot of luck in this game.
Yeah, it feels like mostly luck.
Yeah, it's definitely an on-rails experience. For some people, that's not going to be a problem, right? But you just need to know that if you're getting this game, you're getting it for the story, the artwork, and the atmosphere. You're not getting it because you want to make meaningful decisions.
Right. This is not a tactical combat like scenario type game.
Right. If you want something different, this is the game for you to check out, I think. But you just got to know you're not making choices here. That's a mix of good and bad, probably. I like that it's something different, but I would have really liked more agency because you have almost none. The rules are also, they're just a lot.
Yeah, there's too many. There's a lot of things that probably could have been cut out and the game would have felt the same and been fine.
Exactly. Somebody needed to trim the fat. This really desperately needs a good developer. The ideas that are here are not bad ideas. They just haven't been developed well, I think. They could have really been honed. And the other thing I'll say is that a lot of the components in the game are just not great quality.
Right.
Thin cardstock. The design of the character boards where you have to look on the bottom when you've got pieces on the top. that's not good. So that I would put in the bad category.
Yeah. For me, I think specifically with components, like they're not of like the highest quality, but there's just so many different types of components. Like there's so many different components.
Yeah, this is a game that needed a lot trimmed out of it for sure. And I mean, one last bad thing that I'll say is just mechanically, this game is uninteresting. It's not just the luck factor. It's just that so much of the rules are dedicated to decisions that aren't interesting, or to creating space for decisions that don't turn out to be interesting. So mechanically, if you're looking for something that's rich and thoughtful, it's just not here. That's more than the luck element. There's just nothing inventive or interesting mechanically about this game.
Right. As
far as the ugly, I don't have that much that I would put here, except I'm totally putting those tiny chits in the ugly category.
It's almost funny how small and tiny they are. I mean, just even like there's so many pieces, and then the ones that you're having to like keep in like very specific spots on your character sheet, they're very tiny.
I hate it. I hate it so much. The slightest bump of the table, and they're everywhere. Ugh, it's maddening. And it's made worse by the fact that we've been spoiled components-wise for many years at this point. Right. I mean, game components now are so nice. This feels just like so many steps backward that all of this stuff is magnified. It makes it feel fiddly and underproduced. And yeah, it's a real shame because these tiny chits, man, are probably the worst game component apart from Mansions of Madness minis that I've ever experienced.
Yeah, they're not good.
They're not good at all. So this is the part of the review where we decide if this is a game that gets the stomp of approval. And if you're new to the show, the Stomp of Approval is an award that we give out to games that we believe a great purchase, even if you only ever play it solo, and a game that we really love. So, Carter, is this a Stomp of Approval game for you?
Yeah, I don't think it is for me. I mean, I think it does what it kind of sets out to do really well as far as just creating this atmosphere and the art and everything. And I think the choices that you just kind of adventure-wise are really cool in how it diverges. But it's a little too much up to like the roll of the die, not making super interesting choices. It's just kind of getting from point A to B, going through the steps that allow me to do that.
So I completely agree with all of that. I really do. I think that mechanically this game is pretty uninteresting. I think that it really desperately needed a developer. I think the components are underwhelming. I think a lot of this game just needs a lot of work. But I love it. I mean, I love this game. This is, for me, the game that I love irrationally. I can't defend it mechanically at all, but there is something about this world and this art style and the way that they mesh and the campaign structure that just, I'm totally enthralled while I'm playing this game. I mean, the dumb mechanics mostly get out of the way, and I just create a story is formed in my head as I play and, run into a cock goblin on the road as I am trying to spread blight from town to town or something. Right. It's just, it creates a story that is so memorable and different to me that I'm sure that I will never forget the story of the first campaign that I played in this game. Mm-hmm. There's no chance I will because it's so out there and different.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I played through multiple campaigns and each one has felt very different. And we've talked before on the show about how games that are almost universally appealing seem to be nobody's favorite game, right? Like there are so many games that you could think of, Ticket to Ride or Azul or whatever. I'm sure somebody's going to say like, no, that's my favorite game, whatever. I don't think it's many people's favorite game. It's a go-to. But games that take a risk and do something wildly different endear themselves to a small group of people in a way that those broadly appealing games just can't. And for me, this game does that. It just hits all the right notes for me thematically. It really helps me to get that RPG feel when I can't get the people in my RPG group to sit down and play a session. It's just different and compelling and interesting. Now, I will say I would give this game the stomp because of how much I love it and because I think that there are a lot of people out there who will also love the experience of this because it's unique. But I would only recommend it to a very, very, very select group of people. I know full well that if you look at the artwork on the outside of the box and you think, I don't know if I like that, you're not going to like the game. You just won't. The artwork is such a huge part of why I enjoy it. If hearing that a cock goblin is an enemy in the game turns you off, you're not going to like the game. You're just not. If you think that's kind of funny, you'll probably like it. If you can get past all the mechanical problems and the production problems and the story and the world are what you want out of a game, then you got to try it because there's nothing else out there like it. Don't buy it at full retail price. Wait until it goes on sale and give it a shot if you think this is something that would appeal to you. But yeah, I would stomp it, man.
Yeah, I mean,
I totally get why you do not.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I would say that even with not being like turned off by the art or world, yeah, it's still just it's not enough for me. I don't love it in the same way you do, but it totally makes sense to me why certain people would love this game.
Yeah. So that's kind of a strange ending place for a review for us, but hopefully that gives you an idea of whether this would be something that would appeal to you. If you have not checked it out, go and check it out at goblinco.com, and I will put that in the show notes because you're not going to know how to spell it just from me saying it out loud. Go and check it out and the other Dungeon Degenerates related merchandise because, man, it's wild and different. That's all we've got for this episode. If you have not yet checked out some of the other shows in the Dice Tower Network, which we are a part of, you should do that because there's a lot of really cool board game shows out there that cover games from all different angles, and you can probably find another one out there that's almost as good as ours. So go and check that out at dicetower.com. If you haven't followed us yet on Facebook or Instagram, you should post pictures of games that we're playing or games that we've just gotten in for review and give some initial thoughts on those. Follow us on there to hear more about that. Especially if you're interested in the new Root Clockwork expansion that expands solo play. I wrote up a whole long post on that and which expansions to buy for solo play and all that kind of updates our initial review. So if you're interested in learning more about that or expansions for games, go and follow us on those places because that's the only place probably that we'll end up reviewing expansions for this show after we've conducted the main review. So go and check us out on social media there. If you haven't rated or reviewed the show on iTunes, would you please do that for us? I know that seems like a small thing, but it really helps us to make the show more visible and help more people find it. So go on to iTunes if that's something you use and give us a quick rating or review. And one last thing, we do have a micro badge that you can purchase on Board Game Geek. It costs 8 Geek Gold. But if you don't have 8 Geek Gold, you can send me a message and I will gladly spot you the Geek Gold you need to get it. I'm done saying Geek Gold now. Please send me a message. I'll be more than happy to send you enough to get that beautiful yellow and purple dinosaur for your profile. That's all we've got for this episode, folks. Until next time, my name is Brandon Waite.
And my name is Carter Mackey.
And this is Solosaurus.